Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. I've got a very special episode today. I've got my very dear and very good friend, I call him the ultimate warrior, the American warrior, the guy that digs into the trenches. He's been in places some of us only watch in movies, and he's come out and he lives to talk about it. My friend John Bone. Hey John, how's it going?
I'm doing well, James. You're killing me with that intro,
though. I gotta set the expectations, John.
Oh man,
I have to.
I'll tell you what.
So just to tell our guests a few things. So John and I recorded this very podcast last week, and we were supposed to release it. Only when we came to edit it, the audio quality was not very good. And so we are re-recording. This is our take 2. So if it seems rehearsed, it kind of is because we did this once. But John and I have great conversations. We always do. We're going to be talking about, being prepared for an organization from cyber perspective, from a business continuity side, from a risk management point of view. And John has years and years of experience that he's going to explain here in just a few moments with all of our listeners and viewers. But before we do that, we're just going to take I just want to mention our sponsor for today's episode. I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, GetSmartEye. That's GetSmartEye, like your eye, EYE.com. It's a new security company that's focused on your privacy. How many of you guys have eyes around watching your screens, your phones, your tablets, no matter where you are? It can be your own office, an airport, a train station, a co-working space, and even a coffee shop, right? But there's some documents and some information that really needs to stay away from prying eyes. That's where GetSmartEye comes in. They're using the latest biometric technology to give you complete control over the documents you send and who sees them. Whether you're viewing them yourself or sending them for someone else to view them, the GetSmartEye technology ensures that whoever's seeing it is the right person. And should someone who shouldn't see it grab a look at it, it gets the document to disappear and won't reopen it until it verifies the identity of the person you sent it to. So to get more information, go to getsmarteye.com/James. Again, that's getsmarteye.com/James. Again, getsmarteye.com/James. So, John, before we get going here, why don't you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about your background? Because they're watching you now. Some of them are watching you, John.
Oh, man. Put the pressure on me. Well, West Point graduate, 27 years in the Army, 25 of that as a Green Beret. So steep background in counter-narcotics, counterterrorism, insurgency, security assistance. After I retired, I went ahead and went to work for Joint Forces Command, which no longer exists. But the point being that there I took my irregular warfare asymmetric knowledge and applied it to the use of wargaming to look at operational concepts, contingency planning, assessment of process procedures and capabilities to determine their effectiveness and the synergy that could be obtained when you put them with other organizations. Left Joint Forces Command when it was disestablished under General Mattis's tenure. Went to work at Deloitte. While I was there, I brought wargaming to the federal sector and ran the Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff wargame tabletop exercise series for several years. Helped them start up their Cyber in a Box that they now sell, and help move this into the commercial sector to start running crisis simulations for cyber. Not only assisting CISOs in how to manage their IT silo, but also getting management involved and understanding what their roles and responsibilities were and the things that they had to do that were different than their business as usual management skills. And we've done that. We started doing that in 2013. Big Four bank, financial institutions, insurance companies, 800 exchange provider for the US and Canada, postal service, to name a few of the organizations that we've worked with. Now we're getting into the opportunity to work with both the aviation industry and the maritime industry, and helping them with their cyber challenges as they move into the future. So I really got dipped into doing cyber when I was at the War College, and the 4-star down at SOCOM asked me to write a paper on how SF soldiers could be used in cyber warfare. And so that's what got me started doing the cyber stuff way back in 2000.
It's when you think of cyber in 2000, you don't think of cyber in 2000 because it really didn't exist in 2000, right? Internet networks were primarily military. The internet was just being introduced to the civilian population. It was AOL, 56K connection. We all remember the long dial sound. I mean, the listeners who are, I think my generation or older, we all remember you've got mail if you're using AOL.
Well, it's funny because really cyber back in those days for the military was really about ICS and being able to cut into cable systems, whether it's the transatlantic cable or others, and being able to affect critical infrastructure that shaped the battlefield so that we would have an advantage during a kinetic military operation. Now, obviously, that's evolved and gotten away from the kinetic aspect to the non-kinetic, but still the idea of affecting industrial control system SCADA and the impact that it has on a community is huge. I mean, let's face it, if China were to take down the East Coast power grid and shut down a couple of water plants, our military wouldn't go anywhere because they would be providing health and human services to the American population. So that's how you shape a battlefield, using it in a non-kinetic way, but very effectively giving China a superiority opportunity when they do things like that. So different concept, different way to think about it.
Speaking of China, I kind of want to ask you a question, and this isn't on our kind of our agenda of some of the topics we want to talk about today, but I've been reporting on this for the last few days. It's been headline news. President Trump's directive, the new executive order on national infrastructure and technology, specifically, the media's kind of, I like to call it the mainstream media, is talking, oh, this is about Huawei and the Chinese. And you could argue that a part of this is part of the trade war and, kind of making China understand he's not playing games. He's not Obama or Bush or Clinton, for that matter, or Nixon, that we're not just going to, lay down and let you get a leg up and slowly eat away at us a death by 1,000 cuts. People in DOD and in your position previously have, and you and I have had this conversation offline numerous times of the risk of foreign technology in national critical infrastructure. Does this move go far enough to really address those concerns? I mean, is this the right move? I mean, forget the timing. The timing, we know what the timing has to do with it. Is this the right move, though?
I think it's a step in the right direction. You have to be cognizant of foreign software and hardware that you use. The fact that there are a number of countries that build backdoors into by design in order to have the ability to reach out and take IP from companies in the business world, that business espionage, the ability to take down and understand our IT capabilities with respect to weapon systems, how you can neutralize them. I mean, I'm a huge advocate of you using a 10-cent solution to take down $1 million weapon system. Okay. And that's what they do with some of these chips and other things. They're cheap, they get them in there, and they're able to neutralize the greater effect that we're trying to put on. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but I think it's only the first of a number that have to take place if we are going to have cybersecurity and the reasonable expectation that we're going to have power and water and fuel and the ability to have health and human services for our families and friends.
So one of my key arguments that I've been talking about for quite a while during at least my tenure is, when we look at manufacturing in the U.S., and President Trump's been a very big advocate of bringing manufacturing back to America. It's great to manufacture air conditioning in Indianapolis. It'd be better if we can manufacture every aspect of our national infrastructure and communication infrastructure in America, where we're not relying on anyone else. Do you feel like that's where we need to be?
I don't think isolationism is a choice in today's world. With the IT, with cyber, it's just getting smaller, more compacted, and we are more engaged in having to work with one another. I think the real thing is, how do you vet your allies, your business partners, to ensure that you're not going to be taken down by their activities? I think that's a more critical aspect to have to deal with. And I know that whether it's in a developed country or a lesser developed country, there is graft and corruption that goes on out there, and things happen. Right, wrong, or indifferent. We're human beings. It's part of our character, unfortunately. But the reality is, there's a greater calling to make sure we secure the services for others and on their behalf. There is an unmentioned, unwritten moral or ethical value to that in today's world, now that we have the fifth domain of cyber out there.
Right, and the fifth domain of cyber is very wide, and it's a really large net, and it's different in every arena of technology. I think blockchain cyber security is different than IoT, different than AppSec, different than SCADA and ICS, and different from aviation, and different from maritime. While it's all cyber, I think every single one of those is a niche of cyber, if
Oh,
I'm not mistaken.
no, absolutely. It's a specialty. It's its own microcosm of activities and capabilities that need to be employed and what it is they're trying to do. I mean, if you look at the Triton attack of not too long ago, I mean, they didn't take the traditional way of trying to go in and overset the control systems.
Right.
They were putting that Trojan horse in with a rat that was going to take over the whole thing. And so, a different approach, it continues to evolve, and we have to think about them differently. That's the whole thing about cyber. And I think, if I were a CISO today and I hadn't read Sun Tzu's The Art of War, I'd probably put it at the top of my reading list for one reason and one reason only: is it teaches me to think about the threat differently. It teaches me to think about security differently. And so I think that's one of the biggest problems, is the mindset that we have. We don't have an education process in business degrees at the bachelor, or much in the way at the master's program, that really brings in risk and cybersecurity issues into the management's thinking and how they plan and do business. And so we're playing catch up in that whole arena.
So let me ask you this question, John. Last week when we recorded this podcast, we spent a good period of time talking about some of the different compliance points, whether it be the ISO and the different ways to assess risk. I kind of want to dig deep into that, but before we go that way, I mean, one of the things I really wanted to talk about, and I felt like we missed it last week, and I'm kind of glad we get a second take on it, is wargaming and
Hmm.
cyber wargaming, often called the tabletop exercise. Name it any way you want to give it. There's so many names to it, but coming from your perspective, a lot of times CISOs are expected to not only handle a cyber incident, but quarterback the whole darn thing. And uh, there's so many roles that have to play a part of it. Why is wargaming so important, and what do CISOs, and what message do you give a CISO that's listening to our podcast today in getting more stakeholders into the room when it's time to really do a practice run and getting them to take it seriously?
That's a great question. Let me start with this and think of it in two venues. The first being a technical simulation, where you are doing things with the cybersecurity professionals down there in the SOC and those areas. A technical game where they're going back and forth. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is the management game. And that is where the leaders are in there and they're dealing with all of the issues that have impact on businesses. So that CISO has to do is they have to have a foot in both worlds. They have to control what their people are doing against the playbooks, and how to change their activities in order to support solutions that allow for recovery. Um, they also have to advise the boss on what is within the realm of doable. The management game is something that I haven't gone to a commercial business yet that has successfully, in 4 hours, completed a cyber crisis simulation where they are getting input. They are having to deal with the media. They're having to deal with law enforcement, whether it's municipal, state, or federal. They have not been able to manage the narrative, both internally and externally. And when I say internally, you're talking the C-suite, the board of directors, your employees, the other folks who are on the incident response team, so that they all have a common understanding of what's going on. So then you have externally social media, the news. Uh, customers, supply chain, and those characteristics that they have to deal with. So what you do with a technical game is fairly easy. It's not, while there's some sophisticated tools that you use, the reality is I can do that from just about any place and have that one-on-one operator game. The management game is much more difficult because it gets into understanding rules, regulations at the federal down to the industry level. It's focusing correctly. And so what you do on that war game is really you stress them. It's, you could think of it in a way of as a stress test, but what you're doing is putting them under time, real-time compressed situations where they have to make decisions. The clock's ticking. The bad guys don't stop doing what they're doing, and you have to keep up with it and keep going. What does this game do? It really teaches crisis leadership and synchronization. It's in a non-threatening environment. You don't have to worry about spillage going outside of your company, but you can make an honest mistake and learn from it, provided the leadership has the right mindset to allow you to do that. And that's what they should do, because that's what training and exercising is about, is making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, because those are the lessons we learn the best. And so getting in there, doing their best, trying to understand. Let me give you a case in point. We ran a game last summer for the #2 telecommunications company in the US. As we were going through, it was an insider threat scenario. The individual had gone into some of their facilities and put a banner running across the World Cup soccer game. And the banner said, "Death to the Americans, kill all effing Americans." That instantly becomes a federal and FCC regulatory violation, with the potential, if you haven't done the right things in trying to prevent and then recovering, you're going to get millions of dollars worth of fines on this. It was interesting because the IT architecture folks and network folks instantly shut down telephone and shut down PCs and did those kinds of technical things remotely. And then they looked at their physical security folks and they go, turn off his badge and secure all the doors to the buildings so that nobody can get in. You can only get out. And the physical security folks come back and said, we can't. Our technology is 1980 swipe card. We do it. And we have to physically be at the building to stop the guy. And that was a huge epiphany to the VP for global IT security, because he said, I have no security. If I can't secure my facility and access to the facility of the people, I have no cybersecurity. It doesn't matter how good the systems are, my endpoint security, my biometrics, any of those things. I can't secure my systems. Small thing in the scheme of what you would think of, but really it's a huge factor. War games uncover those kinds of eaches. And so is it an expensive fix? No. Is it a necessary fix? Yeah. And so games uncover things like that. Games uncover people's inability under pressure and stress to make good decisions. Another anecdote, I was with a medium large financial services company running a game. And the good part about this was their CEO had lived through 9/11 and had been in Manhattan when that occurred. However, his incident response team leader and the team had never experienced a real crisis, with the exception of one former military guy. So as their system started to degrade and they were losing the capability to trade and to send emails, and it started slow and then it exponentially increased. By the time the incident response manager, team manager, got in there, they had lost all capability to do that. And he was reporting to the CEO that it was only degraded. Well, that changes a whole set of decisions and actions that you're going to apply to try to recover. And when they finally realized that they had lost all connectivity to trade and to connect with their people, they went to a phone tree and literally picked up the telephone and started calling people around the world to do this. And it was funny because during the after action report, I was standing at the window and we were doing what we call a hot wash. So we have afterwards, we take an hour break, collect key observations, and come back in, and we were briefing back to the C-suite. And I said, you guys lost communications. You went to a telephone tree. Have you finished making those calls? That was 2 hours ago. No, we would still be doing them. I said, and I looked out the window. I said, what's across the street? And the CEO stands up, he goes, Panera. I said, don't you all have everybody's home email address? Did you ever think of sending somebody over there with their personal laptop to send the emails and create a new type of communication system for yourselves? So it's that kind of out of the box, critical, time sensitive thinking that you have to have. And that's what war games do for you at the C-suite, at the incident response level. It trains those kinds of muscle memories for you to think out of the box, to critically assess. So that's probably a lot more than you wanted, but there you
No,
go.
I think that's perfect for a lot of our listeners. They know I typically and spend a lot of time on our show talking with chief information security officer. I very rarely have um, people like you, John, on the show, but your content, the way you approach this, I think is very helpful for our listeners in the fact that doing just the basic tabletop to check the compliance box that we've ran through our incident response program is one thing. Being actually prepared to handle a crisis is another. Given the news this week, where today is Friday, May 17th, this will probably be published next week, 2 weeks, 21 or 22. So you think of by this time when this podcast gets published next week, we've been a week in, I think, some of the busiest cyber news. This has been the news cycle in cyber this week has been no different than the political news cycle. I mean, it's a 24-hour cycle with different things that are happening every single day. I mean, on Wednesday, I did 3 separate news reports because of all the things that were happening. So there's a increase and an uptick in cyber incidents across every single vector in the world today. The good guys are winning some of those battles. The Department of Justice and the FBI Pittsburgh field office, with some great work with some of our international partners in taking down the Gosnim malware crime syndicate. A very great move. That's $100 million of fraud done so far on 41,000 victims. Just those sheer numbers are unbelievable to think about. And I mean, it's. I always say, when you're not in the news in cyber, you're doing a good job, but no one's ever telling you that.
Yeah. And let me add one thing here. If people are looking to really run profitable tabletop exercises or war games, okay, it's very hard to do it from inside your own organization because there's reputations to be protected. There are pet rocks. If you really want to get a sense for what's going on, you get a third-party objective organization that comes in and does it. If they walk in and they give you a spreadsheet of 4 or 5 different vignettes that you can use or scenarios you can use, run. Don't walk to the nearest store, because what they've done is canned it so they can rinse and repeat. If you're going to run a good game, you have to get inside the organization and understand how it functions as part of your baseline assessment up front. And you should create a scenario that is specifically for that company, that's within its industry, that addresses its key business functions. It may be addressing what keeps the CEO up at night. What's the most dangerous? What's the most critical or most likely? And then when you build that, you want to build it so it comes at them not in the way that they do it. Another customer we did it for, a lady who was monitoring social media. She called her nephew who worked in the company on a supply dock and said, "Hey, I'm hearing this on social media about your company." He called the PAO. Okay, well, the network person goes, "Well, that's not how a crisis would come into our company. Our process says this." And my point was, yeah, your process says that, but the bad guys never attack you the way you want, when you want, where you want. And otherwise, they wouldn't do it.
I'm glad you bring that up, because last week we started talking about the risk assessment aspect, the thinking inside the box, the kind of, the attackers kind of know what we're doing because, like, we all read NIST, they read NIST. We all do, you go, you get a certified ethical hacking certification. They know that's what you're doing. They know what they're teaching you. They understand all these different things. They pretty much know how we work, right? They've got all the pre-intelligence for them to launch an attack readily available for them anywhere online.
Yes.
And if they can't get it online, they'll just go to one of the 560 different cybersecurity conferences where you have loudmouth sales and marketing people just letting everyone know how good they do something so that the
Mhm.
bad guys can take that and go home with it and chew on it and then figure out a way to beat it.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
started talking about risk management last time. I kind of want to bring you back to that because I felt like that was really good. You started talking about the different aspects of risk management and risk assessment. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you and kind of have you go into that piece because that's so important.
Well, when you think about risk management, it's a process, it's an ongoing process. Whether it's enterprise risk management or ISO 3100, those are static frameworks. They're architectures that you can go in and check the block. It's very comforting for senior leadership to understand the risk is mitigated on the 17th of May 2019 because all the blocks were checked compliant. However, that the next day, especially with cyber, can change and you can become non-compliant or you can become a victim because that compliance checklist didn't think through each and everything. And they can't because they're written at such a high level for the world. You have to get in and do things on your own. So it's really a process that you have to go to, and you have to think about it as an active process. So it is looking at the compliance checklist. Okay, we've got it. We're a little weak in this area. We need to do some work. And then what do I have to do to maintain that level throughout the course of the year? And that whole model talks about assessing, training individual, collective, remediating, adjusting to emerging threats or new capabilities,
Right.
and then going back and doing it again. How do you take your people? I mean, let's face it, the weakest link in the chain is the human factor. If you think about the maritime domain, three-quarters of the um, malware attacks occur from an insider threat, a disgruntled employee, or an unintentional behavior. Okay. And so to that end, sending out fake phishing emails, is important to see if people are reading. Because what do? It comes in, we think our security has screened it, and we just click on it without looking to see that the word program is spelled with two M's and an E. And our boss is from Argentina, so he'd never use the British spelling. There are things like that are indicators. And so when you talk about the process of doing this and assessing and preparing and moving, you talk about the idea that I can't defend everywhere or I defend nowhere. So I have to pick what's important to protect, what's vital to protect critical IP or PII, PHI kinds of things. I've got to protect those. So that's one level. Then I have those high value, but not as critical levels that I'm trying to protect. And then I've got the rest. And if I'm smart when I think about the risk assessment and my management of that, I'm looking at that bottom tier that is vulnerable. And I'm looking at the tier above it of those high value and what resources I could move in very short term to protect something lower that starts to develop in the way of a problem. And it's that agility in moving pieces around the board that are going to make you successful in managing your risk in a crisis. Um, we talk about cyber risk insurance. Okay. We talk about how they calculate the premiums, the analogs that they use to run that. Well, a lot of them are pretty simple. X number of clients, X amount of value on the average, there's your premium. Wouldn't you rather be able to look at an insurance, whether it's Lloyd's or somebody else, and say, look, not only do we have this hardware and software in place, but we exercise, and I would like to negotiate with you a way to reduce our premium. So if we do this exercise from a third party objective evaluator or assessor, and we get rated about a 3. Now, for those who are familiar with with the government, we have the Carnegie Mellon maturity indices.
Right.
Okay, you got to be a 3 on that in order to get the government contracts. Well, we've done a similar thing with Wargame with respect to assessing leadership. So if you want to be a 3 equivalent in this, you can look at that cyber person, that insurance person, and say, look, CMMI, I'm a 3. On this other indices, I'm a 3. If I improve that every year, can you lower my premium? It gives you something to negotiate with that's tangible because there are results. There's observations, what occurred, so you can see what happened. There are insights, those things that transcend multiple business functions in the organization. Then there's actionable recommendations. Now, a really good provider will not recommend a vendor. Go buy from this guy. No, the really good wargaming team is going to look at you and say, if you want to manage these crises and reduce the risk, here are the top 2 or 3 types of software that you could purchase. And it's up to you because you have proclivities, you have a personality, and they're going to be things that fit and you're more comfortable with. But you can provide them recommendations and say these will work with your systems without telling them who the vendor is they have to buy it from. And that's important because that gives them ownership. And that's what this is all about when you manage risk, is ownership of your activities. I've never seen a risk management matrix that when you set it up and you look at from extremely critical to no effect, and then you manage the kinds of activities, it's a nice spreadsheet. It briefs really well. But how do you make it come to life? You make it come to life through activities, through workshops, through attending workshops. There are lots of ways to get information, and you can go and listen. Many times you can watch a podcast, and it's not bad to have a junior person do it and bring the information to you, but that allows you to manage the risk and have the agility and decision-making processes to allow you to move forward. So let me stop there for a second and see what I need to clarify with you, Jim.
No, I think you're on the right path here when it comes to risk management. Too often, the way people are assessing risk is flawed in nature. One of the arguments behind, I know a lot of cyber insurance underwriters, and some of them are very, very smart, and they look at the due diligence kind of information sheet when it comes to cyber that they ask organizations to fill, and they assess where you're at in terms of industry and location and network and different challenges, and they throw a premium out there. I think the cyber insurance industry as a whole is very immature still. It's going to hit a level of maturity. Premiums will go up.
Mm-hmm.
That's inevitable. It just is. I kind of want to transition to what you and I spoke about last time, and we continually speak about it, which is this thinking in a box mentality when it comes to security. Spoke about the different, ISO 2701 need of an organization to be compliant with, and all these different compliance points, which are all great in all basic functionality of it. They're needed. You need to have some sort of standard. I personally don't think that's enough. I'm one of those who feels like cyber should be within an organization, within a government, within an implementation level. I feel like with cyber, we're very much like, and I hate to say this, I don't want to get too political, but I'm going to say it. I feel like we're like President Obama. We're going to attack you tomorrow at 5:00 if you do this. And you're kind of letting the bad guys know what you're doing. You're kind of advertising how you're going to be doing it, right? Because now they're monitoring your movement. So there's no way you're really going to surprise them. They are going to empty a building. They are going to clear some of their most valuable assets from a facility because they know that's probably what you're going to target more. The attack isn't really designed to do damage. It's more of a PR stunt. I felt like during Obama's administration, that was very much a lot of the work that he did. And I feel like in cyber, we're very much behind that 8 ball of, hey, look at us. We've got NIST and we've got ISO, and you can do all these different certifications. And this is how we assess risk. And we're pretty much handing the bad guys our playbook, right? And just telling them, hey, find our weakness and then strike.
Yeah, I think it's important when you think about not only risk assessment, but how you plan to mitigate that risk through the plans, policies, and procedures, playbooks that you develop. You need to understand those are a point of departure because, as I said before, they never attack when, where, and how you want them to. And so while IT specialists can have a what to do, if A, then B kind of playbook, leadership and management has to have a how. How do I think about how do I use these policies, procedures that align resources, communications network, and the ability to build solutions on the fly. I've got to think constantly of a different way of doing it. Case in point, if you think about drones and you think about the use of heat and the ability to track heat signatures, okay, if you go to northern Nigeria, Boko Haram, for instance, they defeat our drones all the time. How do they do it? Well, they're driving down the road, they get notified of drones coming on their cell phones, which has a network, and they get, they pay a young man down the street when he sees a drone, he gets $5 if he calls it in, kind of thing. They pull under a tree, they pull out a grass mat that's been hand woven by grandma, throw it on the hood, and the drone goes right on by because the heat sheet signature has been nullified. And so when you think about these risk management techniques of getting out of the box with how you think, what's the approach? You want to do it from a principles and precepts perspective. You want to do it understanding that these policies, these plans you write, are only good until first contact. Once that attack begins, it doesn't follow any of the flows you put in there, but they're references, and you can turn to a tab on malware. You can turn to a tab on any of the other things that you want to, whether it is, a DDoS attack or whatever. And you can see some of the things that are going there, and then you can cross-reference quickly. So they provide reference material, but you still have to come up with a new solution. And you can only do that if you understand what's happening and you have credible reporting processes in place.
I want to transition a bit to training and awareness and professional development. We've kind of briefly touched on a lot of those and some of the stuff that we've spoken about thus far. But what's the most important part that a organization should look at when it comes to cyber training? We talked about the phishing tests, and I get your point there. I feel like with organizations, CISOs, CIOs, CEOs that I interact with on a regular basis, when you're in cybersecurity, and I'm going to go off on a rant here for just a few moments. So if you're listening and tuning in, this is one of my famous rants that I always go on with a guest because it's just one of those. So I will say this. When you're in security, it's very easy for us to say everyone should care about security. And to a degree, we're absolutely right. However, realistically speaking, in an average 9-hour workday of an American or any person on planet Earth, you're so concerned about doing your job that even if security had a big, you had a big freaking sign right in front of your head that said, think of security, right? You're still going to make a mistake somewhere down the line. And it's only human to err, right? I mean, that's basic, kind of one of those basic concepts that I always say. People are going to make mistakes. You're going to get attacked. The question is, how resilient are you to the attack that you're experiencing? How quick can you get back? That goes to our cyber war gaming aspect. How much are you practicing? How is your playbook printed? Is it in the folder? Is it ready? Are your teams ready to dispatch? Have you assigned roles? All those different things, those all play an impact, because when it happens, you kind of, you want it to be muscle memory, like you said, John. But the other aspect is, a CEO in most organizations is so concerned with running the business, taking care of shareholders, doing the sales, doing the PR. A CEO isn't someone who hides behind the door. He's the front and center of a company, right? And that's where the challenge lies, right? How do you train all these different folks on cyber while they still have to worry about finances and operations and sales and marketing and HR and payments and accounts receivable and IT and, innovation and partnerships and so much of that? Where do you fit cyber in all of that to every single person? That's that's the ultimate. I know that's a very, very tough question, because it is. No one really has the right answer for it, but I love to hear ideas.
Well, it's funny because it is a bit of indoctrination, quite
Right.
honestly, to get people to think of it. Now, the CEO should not be concentrating on cybersecurity. The CEO should be messaging that we have a secure organization because we have done these things, and he's able to um, express and discuss with potential clients or financiers or new partners or supply chain partners why that security is a benefit to them and provides additional revenue and security in knowing that when they, or confidence rather than security, confidence in knowing that when they work with this organization, it's going to be able to flow. They're not going to have to worry about being part of a flop or somebody who has a real problem. I think that C-suites aren't really part of incident response teams, and they shouldn't be because they should be at that decision-making level above it. That incident response team should be in a layer below it that works up to them in the board of directors to get the decisions, to tell them this is what's happening, this is our recommendation of what we should do, and that CEO can then very quickly, or the board can very quickly say, yeah, we want you to go that direction, or we want you to change and look at something else. So I think that the idea of having all of these things locked and cocked and ready to go are good, but training security, you have to be vigilant. Now, I see it all the time here in DC. People walk around with their cards hanging out of their shirts.
Everyone, I really want to say thank you for listening and watching this podcast. We did have some technical difficulty towards the end, and John and I had a lot more to talk about, so I'm going to bring him back on in respect to time. And John's a very busy person, so we couldn't really expand and go above and beyond the time frame that we did have. And this was our second time trying it, so I do want to apologize to John and thank him for being such a great sport in handling some of our difficulties. And as many of you know, technical difficulties are often taking place at the worst times, and this was one of them. So I do want to apologize for that to John Bone and to you, our listeners. I promise to bring John back and continue to do that and have a conversation. If you have any questions for John Bone or myself for the next episode, you can go to James_Azar1 on Twitter and DM me or tweet your questions, or if you want to hear from John about different things. I'm going to try to get into his Green Beret background and talk about some of the really cool stuff he's done, especially from a special operation perspective, and give you some insight into that as well in our next episode. Until then, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your dedication of listening to our podcast. We just launched a contest until the end of May, where if you go to your favorite podcast listening platform, wherever that is, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you choose to listen to the CyberHub Engage podcast, and you rate us and send us a screenshot, you enter a drawing to win a $50 Amazon gift card. We will do that live drawing live on our YouTube channel. So all you have to do is submit it. You'll get an invite to our YouTube discussion and our YouTube drawing, and one very lucky person will get a $50 Amazon gift card to use and spend, and someone may get a few free CyberHub Engage t-shirts. I just don't know yet. It depends on how generous I feel after Memorial Day. Typically, I'm very generous after Memorial Day, as Micah would always say. So having said that, I want to say have a great rest of your week. Thank you for listening. Please make sure you subscribe and rate our podcast. We are the fastest growing cybersecurity podcast in the country. Thanks for listening.